Close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the rhythmic metallic ticking of the old clock on the kitchen wall and the sharp, comforting smell of onions and paprika frying in hot fat on a Sunday morning. Welcome back to a time that feels like another lifetime. Today we are taking a deeply emotional journey back to the Hungarian homes of the 1960s, 70s and 80s. We are going to dust off 20 forgotten household items that were once the heartbeat of our daily lives. These were not just objects, they were the silent witnesses to our youth, our struggles, and our greatest joys. I promise you, the very last item on our list will bring a tear to your eye, as it was the very thing that held our families so closely together in the darkest of nights. Before we open the door to our childhood homes, we must remember how time itself felt differently back then. Time moved slower, without the frantic rushing of the modern world. We had to wait for things. We waited for the water to boil, we waited for the radio tubes to warm up, and we waited for the mailman to bring news from loved ones. There is a modern myth that because we lacked advanced technology, our lives were somehow poorer. But anyone who lived through those decades knows the exact opposite is true. Our lives were infinitely richer in human connection. Because our machines required our physical presence and our manual labor, we were deeply connected to the rhythm of our homes. We relied on each other. We fixed things when they broke, instead of throwing them away, and in doing so, we learned the value of patience, resilience, and the quiet beauty of a simple, honest life. Let us begin our journey with a sound and a scent that defined the start of every single day. I am talking about the classic stovetop espresso maker known affectionately as the Cotiogo. Imagine the heavy, cold metal in your hands as you unscrewed the top from the base in the quiet twilight of the morning. You would fill the bottom chamber with cold water, carefully spooning the finely ground coffee into the metal filter, pressing it down just right. Then you placed it on the gas stove, striking a match to light the blue flame, and then the wait began. You did not scroll on a phone, you simply stood there, listening. First came the soft boil, and then that unmistakable rhythmic sputtering sound that gave the pot its name. It sounded like a warm heartbeat in the kitchen. As the dark, rich liquid bubbled up into the top chamber, the most incredible aroma of roasted coffee filled the room, seeping into the hallway and waking up the rest of the house. Drinking that strong black coffee from a tiny porcelain cup was not a rush for caffeine. It was a quiet moment of peace, a ritual of gathering your thoughts before facing the world outside. Next, we must remember the metallic hiss of the soda siphon, a true staple of the Hungarian pantry. In those days, we did not buy plastic bottles of sparkling water that polluted the earth and lost their fizz. We had beautiful, heavy glass siphons, often protected by a woven metal mesh, or perhaps the sleek, space-age aluminium ones. Do you remember the weight of it when it was full? The real magic, however, was the ritual of the carbon dioxide cartridges. We would collect the empty metal bullets in a small bag and walk down to the local grocery store to exchange them for full ones. Back home, you would fill the siphon with cold tap water, screw on the top, and insert the heavy little cartridge into the holder. With a firm twist, the gas would rush into the water with a loud, aggressive hiss, chilling the metal instantly. Pressing that lever and watching the sharp, aggressive bubbles shoot into a glass of thick, homemade raspberry syrup was pure joy. It was the taste of summer afternoons, of guests sitting in the garden, and of simple, unpretentious hospitality. And then there was the radio, specifically the beloved portable Sokol radio, often housed in a thick brown leather case that smelled faintly of shoe polish and old journeys. This small, heavy brick of technology was our window to the entire world. Think back to the tactile sensation of turning that stiff plastic tuning wheel. You had to move it with the precision of a surgeon to catch a clear signal through the ocean of static. Sometimes, late at night, you would sit in the dim light, carefully tuning in to foreign stations, listening to the voices fading in and out like ghosts over the airwaves. Or perhaps it was Sunday afternoon, the smell of fried meat lingering in the air, and the whole family gathered around to listen to a radio play or the weekend football match. The sound quality was tinny and scratched, but we did not care. We listened with our full attention, painting the pictures in our own minds. That little radio travelled with us to the shores of Lake Balaton, to the weekend garden plots, acting as a faithful companion that brought music and news into the quietest corners of our lives. Let us turn our attention to the corner of the kitchen, where the mighty Lehel refrigerator stood like a silent, humming sentry. With its rounded edges, thick metal handle, and heavy door that shut with a satisfying airtight thud, it was built to last a lifetime. But owning this machine meant participating in the grand, messy ritual of defrosting. Do you remember the thick, glacier-like ice that would slowly swallow the small freezer compartment over the months? When the ice grew too thick, my mother would unplug the machine, the humming would stop, and a strange, profound silence would fall over the kitchen. We would place pots of boiling hot water inside to melt the frost, waiting patiently as chunks of ice crushed down into the drip tray. Sometimes, if we were impatient, we would gently chip away at the ice with a wooden spoon, careful not to puncture the delicate cooling lines. The smell of the cold, damp enamel mixed with the faint scent of stored vegetables and cured meats is something you never forget. Defrosting the Lehel was not just a chore, it was a rhythmic reset of the household, a reminder that we had to take care of our belongings so they would take care of us. Moving into the bathroom, we find a machine that required blood, sweat, and absolute devotion from our mothers. The classic Hajdú washing machine. This was not a modern appliance where you pushed a button and walked away. This was a round, white metal tub that demanded your full presence. On wash days, the entire bathroom turned into a steamy, humid sauna. You had to fill the machine with water, sometimes heating it on the stove first if the boiler was empty. Then came the heavy dose of strong, powdery detergent that stung your nose. When you turned the dial, the agitator at the bottom would violently whip the water into a thick lather. You stood over it, watching the clothes spin in that soapy whirlpool, manually fishing them out with a large wooden stick so you would not scald your hands. The physical labor was intense, wringing out heavy, wet sheets, the air thick with the smell of soap and damp cotton. Mothers and grandmothers sacrificed their hands and their backs to this ritual. Wash day was a communal event, an entire day dedicated to the care of the family, leaving the house smelling clean, humid, and full of honest, hard-working love. But the washing machine was only half of the story, because right next to it stood its wild, untamed companion, the Hajdú spin dryer, or as we called it, the centrifuge. If you grew up in this era, you know exactly what I am talking about. This tall, cylindrical machine was essentially a jet engine disguised as a household appliance. You had to carefully balance the wet clothes inside the metal drum. If you placed a heavy towel slightly off-center, turning the machine on was a recipe for absolute chaos. It would begin to roar, vibrating so violently that it would start dancing across the tiled bathroom floor. I remember my mother literally sitting on top of the lid, pressing her weight down to tame the wild beast, laughing and shouting over the deafening noise. Meanwhile, a thick stream of soapy water would shoot out from the side spout into a waiting plastic bucket. When the roaring finally subsided and you opened the lid, the clothes were plastered against the sides of the drum, miraculously almost dry. It was a terrifying, loud, and incredibly effective machine that provided a shared experience of domestic survival. Speaking of roaring machines, We cannot forget the iconic Raketa vacuum cleaner. Shaped exactly like a shiny, space-age torpedo, it looked like it belonged on a mission to the moon rather than in a Hungarian living room. Pulling it out of the closet was an event in itself. It sat on two metal runners, like a little sled, and you dragged it behind you across the Persian rugs. When you switched it on, it emitted a high-pitched, deafening whine that sent the family cat scrambling for cover under the nearest bed. The exhaust blew a constant stream of warm, distinctly dusty air at the back, a smell that instantly transports me back to Saturday morning cleaning sessions. There were no disposable bags. Instead, it had a thick, heavy cloth bag inside. Emptying that bag into the rubbish bin was a dusty, messy affair that usually required going out to the courtyard. Despite its terrifying noise and heavy weight, the Raketa was virtually indestructible. It was a symbol of progress, a loud, proud declaration that the weekend chores had begun, and a piece of engineering that simply refused to die. Let us step back into the kitchen and look at the stove, where a set of heavy bonihedi enamel pots were always simmering. You know the ones I mean. They were usually a deep, vibrant red with cheerful white polka dots, or perhaps a pristine white with a dark blue rim. These were not just pots. They were the very soul of the Hungarian kitchen. They were heavy, sturdy, and held the heat beautifully. I can still hear the distinct, heavy clatter of the enamel lid being lifted by my grandmother to check on the Sunday meat soup. That golden broth would simmer in the largest red pot for hours on end, the rich scent of root vegetables, peppercorns, and slow-cooked meat wrapping the house in a blanket of anticipation. The enamel would occasionally chip over the years, leaving little black scars on the rim, but that only added to their character. Holding the smooth, curved handles of those pots felt like holding the hands of the children who cooked tirelessly before us. Even today, seeing that bright red enamel instantly brings back the feeling of being loved, of knowing that no matter how hard life was outside, there was always a hot, nourishing meal waiting for you at home. When the cold winter evenings drew in early, and the darkness settled outside the windows, the magic of the slide projector came alive. Long before the era of endless television channels and tablets, this small, hot metal box was our cinema. My father would set it up on the dining table, pointing the lens toward a blank white wall or a freshly ironed sheet pinned to the door. We would turn off all the lights, and the room would fill with a warm, comforting smell of heating dust and the hot light bulb. The whirring of the small fan was the background music to our anticipation. Then, the first frame of the fairy tale would click into place, illuminating the dark room with vibrant, drawn colours. We did not have audio. The magic relied entirely on human connection. A parent or an older sibling would slowly turn the knob, clicking to the next slide, and read the captions aloud in the darkness. We sat on the floor, mesmerized by the glowing images of folk heroes and talking animals. It was an intimate, shared storytelling experience that forced us to slow down, to listen to each other's voices, and to let our own imaginations fill in the gaps. Above the kitchen table or behind the stove, there was almost always a traditional embroidered wall protector. These were large pieces of crisp white cloth, carefully hand-stitched with blue or red thread, featuring idyllic scenes of domestic life, and most importantly, rhyming proverbs. Some warned of the dangers of gossip, while others praised the virtues of a clean home and a loving husband. I remember staring at the intricate cross-stitches while eating my morning slice of bread with dripping. They served a practical purpose, of course, protecting the wallpaper from cooking grease and dirty hands, but looking back, it was so much more than that. They were the silent moral compass of the household, a mother's philosophy stitched into fabric for everyone to see. The countless hours spent embroidering those cloths in the dim evening light spoke of a time when women created beauty with their own hands to elevate the modesty of their surroundings. The embroidered protector transformed a simple brick wall into a warm, personalized space, reminding us daily of the simple, honest values that held our families together. In the living room, the absolute center of gravity during the long, bitter winters was the massive ceramic tile stove. It was not merely a source of heat, it was a living, breathing member of the household. Building the fire was a daily, sacred ritual. You would open the heavy iron door, sweep out the grey ash from the day before, and carefully arrange the crumpled newspaper, the kindling, and the heavy blocks of wood or brown coal. Striking the match, you would listen for the roaring draught that signalled the fire had caught. As the hours passed, the beautiful glazed ceramic tiles would absorb the heat, radiating a deep, penetrating warmth that modern central heating can never replicate. Do you remember coming in from the snowy street, peeling off your wet coat and pressing your freezing back directly against the warm tiles? It was the greatest comfort in the world. The faint smell of wood smoke and hot dust always lingered in the air around it. The stove held the warmth long into the night, standing as a quiet, glowing guardian that kept the freezing winter firmly outside our windows. Another memory that brings an immediate rush of nostalgia is the morning ritual of the glass milk bottles. Today, milk comes in soulless paper cartons or plastic jugs, but back then, it arrived in heavy transparent glass bottles capped with thick aluminium foil. The foil was usually silver, but sometimes gold or striped, depending on the fat content. Pushing your thumb through that cool metallic foil with a satisfying pop is a tactile memory I will never forget. Beneath the cap was the thickest, richest plug of heavy cream that we used to fight over. The milk itself tasted colder, purer, somehow more real when poured from that heavy glass rim, and the life cycle of the bottle was a lesson in respect and resourcefulness. You never threw a bottle away. You washed it out carefully, placed it in a wire carrier, and walked it back to the grocery store to claim your deposit or exchange it for a full one. The melodic, glass-on-glass clinking sound of those bottles as people carried them down the street was the unofficial morning soundtrack of our youth. If you walk through the courtyard of any old apartment building today, you might still see the heavy metal frame standing in the center, a ghost of a bygone era. This was the domain of the traditional carpet beater. Spring cleaning, or even just a regular Saturday morning, was not complete without hauling the heavy Persian rugs down the stairs and draping them over that metal bar. Armed with a woven rattan or plastic beater, you would strike the rug with all your might. The rhythmic, echoing sound would bounce off the brick walls of the courtyard, joining a chorus of other neighbors doing the exact same thing. You could see the thick clouds of dust erupting into the sunlight with every blow. It was hard, exhausting physical labor, making your shoulders ache and your hands blister. Yet there was a profound sense of satisfaction in it. When you carried that freshened rug back upstairs and rolled it out on the floor, the entire room smelled of fresh air and hard work. It was a visible communal display of taking pride in one's home. While the stove-top pot brewed the coffee, the preparation of the beans themselves required another iconic device, the electric coffee grinder. Most of us had those small, brightly coloured plastic cylinders, often a vibrant orange or a mustard yellow, manufactured in East Germany. When you poured the shiny, roasted beans into the metal cup and pressed the plastic lid down, the machine came alive with an aggressive, high-pitched buzz that vibrated right through your hand and arm. You had to shake it slightly while holding the button to ensure an even grind, but the true magic happened the moment you released the button and pulled the lid off. An invisible cloud of the most intense, bitter and chocolatey aroma would burst into the room. It was a smell so rich you could almost taste it in the back of your throat. We would use a tiny, stiff brush to sweep every single precious grain of ground coffee out of the corners of the metal bowl. Nothing was wasted. That small machine turned a simple morning task into a deeply sensory experience that awakened the mind even before the first sip was taken. In the hallway, sitting proudly on a small wooden table, often resting on a meticulously crocheted lace doily, was the rotary telephone. It was made of heavy, indestructible bakelite, usually in a dull grey or black. Making a phone call back then was not a casual flick of the thumb. It was a deliberate, physical act. You picked up the heavy receiver, which had a distinct, slightly metallic smell from years of breath and conversation. You placed your finger in the hole of the numbered dial, pulled it all the way around to the metal stop, and let it go. The smooth, mechanical whirring sound of the dial spinning back into place is a sound that has vanished from the earth forever. You had to memorize the numbers of your loved ones. They were carved into your brain. Because not every household had a phone, receiving a call was an event. When that loud, jarring, metallic bell rang through the hallway, the whole family would freeze. The cord was coiled and heavy, meaning you could not walk away to multitask. You stood there, anchored to the spot, fully present in the conversation, giving the person on the other end your complete and undivided attention. Open the kitchen drawer in any working-class Hungarian home of that era, and you would be greeted by the distinct rattle of aluminium cutlery. Before the luxury of stainless steel became common, we ate our daily meals with spoons and forks made of this incredibly light, matte metal. They felt almost weightless in the hand, and the metal was soft enough that a stubborn piece of meat could easily bend the prongs of a fork out of shape. We would simply bend them back. I can still vividly recall the slight, almost metallic taste they left in the mouth, especially when eating hot soups or acidic tomato stews. The surface of every spoon was covered in thousands of tiny, microscopic scratches, a map of countless family dinners, scraped plates, and shared conversations. We did not consider them cheap. They were simply what we had. They were the humble tools with which we ate our chicken paprikash and potato casserole. They represented an era where the focus was never on the elegance of the tableware, but entirely on the warmth of the food and the company of the people sitting around the table. Dominating the living room of so many homes was the massive, imposing presence of colonial-style furniture. These huge war units were made of dark, heavy wood, featuring ornate carvings and brass handles that attempted to bring a touch of historic grandeur into small, modern apartments. The sheer size of these cabinets meant they dictated the entire layout of the room. I can still close my eyes and smell the distinct, sharp scent of beeswax and lemon furniture polish that my mother rubbed into the wood every single week to keep it shining. The glass-fronted display sections were reserved for the family's finest crystal glasses and porcelain tea sets, items that were considered far too precious to ever actually be used. Behind the heavy wooden doors lay the true archives of the family. There were neatly folded linens smelling of lavender soap, important documents kept in worn leather folders, and shoeboxes overflowing with black and white photographs. The colonial war unit was not just a piece of furniture, it was a fortress, a symbol of stability and hard-earned domestic pride that stood tall against the passing decades. When Saturday morning arrived, the ritual of the market required the faithful companion of the era, the plastic-woven shopping basket. Unlike the flimsy, disposable bags of today, these baskets were practically indestructible. They were woven from thick, rigid strips of brightly coloured plastic, often in dizzying patterns of red, white, blue, and yellow. Carrying it empty on the walk to the market, the two plastic handles would squeak rhythmically against each other. But the true memory lies in the journey home. The basket would be incredibly heavy, the handles digging deeply into the palms of your hands, leaving red indentations that took hours to fade. Inside, it held the treasures of the week. There was a large loaf of crusty white bread sticking at the top, bunches of fresh carrots and parsley tied with string, and a heavy package of meat wrapped tightly in brown butcher paper. Setting that heavy, squeaky basket down on the kitchen floor signalled that the weekend had truly begun. It was a sturdy, brightly coloured vessel of our sustenance, carrying the heavy weight of a family's weekly survival with enduring grace. In every pocket, on every shelf, and next to every stove lay a tiny object that sparked the warmth of our daily lives, a box of classic Szeged matches. The small, flimsy wooden boxes were covered in distinctive, colourful graphic art, sometimes advertising state enterprises, sometimes urging fire safety. Sliding the little drawer open, you were met with a row of thin, fragile wooden sticks, each topped with a dark red head. Striking the match against the rough, sandy side of the box produced a sharp, tearing sound, immediately followed by the strong, pungent smell of sulfur. That scent is permanently etched into my memory. It was the smell that preceded the lighting of the gas stove for the morning coffee, the firing up of the tile stove in the dead of winter, or a grandfather lighting his evening pipe on the balcony. It was a brief, fleeting moment of fire that initiated almost every comforting ritual in the home. The rough texture of the box and that sharp burst of sulfur remind us of a time when creating fire was a deliberate, manual act, requiring a steady hand and a moment of pause. Finally, we come to the most important piece of furniture in the entire home, the one that held the family together, the pull-out sofa, known as the recami. In those days, apartments were small, and the luxury of separate bedrooms was rare. The living room was the center of existence by day, and by night it magically transformed into the master bedroom. The recami lived a double life. During the evening, the whole family would sit on its slightly scratchy upholstery, shoulder to shoulder, watching the single channel on the black and white television. Then, when it was time for sleep, the ritual began. You would pull the heavy seat forward, listening to the loud metallic creak of the heavy springs. Underneath was the hidden storage compartment, smelling faintly of old wood and feathers, holding the thick, heavy quilts and pillows. You made the bed with crisp, cold linens, transforming the space completely. Lying there in the dark, listening to the ticking of the war clock, the creaking of those springs beneath you was the sound of safety. The recami represents the incredible closeness of our families, the way we shared our limited spaces, and the deep, unbreakable bonds that were forged when we lived our lives so closely intertwined. As we fold away the heavy quilts and close the door on these memories, it becomes clear what we are truly longing for. We do not just miss the heavy enamel pots, the crackling radios, or the roaring washing machines. We miss the people we were when we used them. We miss our youth, the slow passage of time, and the deep, unbreakable connection we had with our parents and grandparents who worked so hard to give us a good life. These 20 items were the humble tools of our shared history. If this journey brought warmth to your heart, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video, as it helps us keep these precious memories alive. Now, I want to ask you a question. Which of these items brings back the strongest memory for you, or is there another treasured object from your Hungarian childhood that we missed? Please share your personal stories in the comments below, because your memories are the true history of our generation.